Good evening. Wonderful to be here tonight. I'm historian Douglas Brinkley, Rice University. I'm also happen to be a board member of the National Archives Foundation in Washington, D.C., which has been a great, great honor. And really what's brought us together here is to honor Dr. Shogan, and as she's touring around the United States, visiting 42 National Archives facilities. 42 is a lot in the modern travel world, so she's trying to meet the employees and get to know everybody. And we appreciate you taking the time to come here to Rice University. And I'd like you guys to introduce yourselves and say anything you'd like of why you're here tonight.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Foki. I'm the head of special collections at Fondren Library at Rice University. I'm an archivist. I've been here about 21 years, but just in this role for the past 3 or 4 years. And I'm a certified archivist and a digital archive specialist.
Great.
Great. Hi, I'm Sarah Lohman. I'm the Vice Provost and University Librarian, and I have worked at Rice since 1985. So I'm a special collection myself. I have been one of the longest term employees here. I've been the university librarian since 2007, and I've always been very interested and excited about archives, and I'm quite honored to meet Dr. Shogan tonight and be on the panel.
And I welcome you from the whole Rice community.
Thank you.
We're really honored to have you here. I wanted to begin by asking you, before we get into heavy stuff, about you grew up. I once spent time with David McCullough, a historian who grew up in Pittsburgh, and he told me his favorite place in the whole United States was to sit on the cliffs looking at where the rivers meet in Pittsburgh. Tell me about your childhood growing up in Pittsburgh and your journey to Boston College and becoming a political scientist.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here at Rice. I've been to Texas many times. My brother lives in Austin, right outside of Austin, so I'm very familiar with that part of the state, but I've not been here to Houston before, and I'm very excited to be here and also to be part of this panel, so thank you. Yes, I grew up outside of Pittsburgh. I didn't grow up in downtown Pittsburgh or directly in the city, but I grew up in a small town about 12 or 13 miles outside of the city, east of Pittsburgh. If you've ever been on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, I grew up on a stop from the Pennsylvania Turnpike in a town called Irwin. And, I had a pretty, I guess you could say, conventional southwestern Pennsylvania upbringing. I went to a Catholic grade school. Most of the people I knew in southwestern Pennsylvania, it was a Catholic area where I grew up. I went to a Catholic grade school. I went to a public high school, though my parents were very supportive of public education, went there. And when it was time to go to college, my dad really wanted me to go to Notre Dame. And it just, for a lot of different reasons, it just seemed like the right fit for me. And I wanted to go somewhere that was a little bit more urban. And so we ended up going to visit Boston College on one of our college trips. And I really liked it. My parents really liked it. So they had a very good honors program that I was very interested in. And so that's why I ended up at Boston College. But Pittsburgh I love Pittsburgh. I'm going there next week for the entire week for Thanksgiving. My dad still lives in Pittsburgh, and I still have family who live in Pittsburgh. And my husband and I like to go. We spend over Thanksgiving 5 days in Pittsburgh at least, where we visit family, but we also go and enjoy the city. We're big sports fans, so we'll go to a Penguins game. But we also like going to a lot of the museums in Pittsburgh. I grew up in a community, one connection to the archives in particular, I grew up in a community right next door to me were first-generation Americans who grew up next to me, who had fled communist Hungary in the 1950s because of being persecuted, in part because of religious beliefs, but were opponents of the regime. And so somehow they ended up next to my parents right outside of Pittsburgh. They had relatives in Western Pennsylvania. I was greatly influenced by growing up next to first generation immigrants, because hearing their story at a very young age, understanding that not everybody grew up, not everybody had the benefits that I did growing up in the United States, where they lived, not having freedom to choose what your profession is, not having freedom of movement, not having freedom of religion, and not having autonomy. Just to hear those stories as a kid was, I view that as being extraordinarily influential. And when I see the Declaration of Independence, where I work in Washington, D.C., the founding documents, I sometimes think of my neighbors, that I grew up next to, and I never take it for granted, because, what I like to say is, we think here in the United States, we're used to democracy. We're used to these principles of liberalism and living in a rights-based society. That is not the default in the world, right? Not in the world now, and not the history of humankind. The history of humankind is tyranny and autocracy. So we are the exception to the rule. We are not the rule, right? And it's helpful to have those reminders.
So how does the National Archives? Yeah, it's a great. How does the National Archives preserve democracy?
Right. So we play an important role at the National Archives. We're certainly not the only institution that preserves democracy. We play a very important role. And how we do that is that we are the nation's record keeper. That is our mission, to preserve, protect, and share our nation's records. And a record is any documentary evidence of a decision that was made in the United States government, or documenting an important occurrence or event or location or place or person. So we are the repository of all of that documentary evidence or records. And as a political scientist, you can't have a democracy without having some degree of accountability of the government. That's a necessary ingredient for a democracy. Just like if you were making a cake, you need to have flour and eggs. So accountability is a necessary ingredient for democracy. And you cannot have accountability in a democracy without having authoritative collections and comprehensive collections of records, documentary evidence of the decisions that were made, of all of our nation's leaders, policymakers, federal employees, including people like me, to make sure that you hold them accountable for the decisions that they make for our democracy. So that's our primary role in democracy, and that transparency that goes along with it.
How do you make the archives of our country accessible? And for example, for veterans, if you're a veteran and wanted to see your record, is there a way to simplify that process in the modern age?
Yes, there is, and we're working on it. And the veterans records is a good story, so I'll start with that one. All of our veterans records are located right outside of St. Louis at the National Personnel Record Center, known as NPRC. It's a huge facility. It was my first trip as Archivist of the United States. And it was my first trip to go to St. Louis because during the pandemic, there was a backlog had accumulated of requests from citizens and families for veterans records. And that backlog, went all the way up to 400, 500,000 request backlog. So very, very daunting. And when I was the nominee, I thought, I knew what my priority had to be once I learned about that. And that was, if I got in there, we had to make that a priority to eliminate that backlog. So that's why I went to St. Louis for my first trip. The good news is that we have drawn down that backlog. It will be completely eliminated by the end of January 2024. So, and that is credit to the staff at NPRC who have worked, overtime, worked on weekends, holidays to be able to eliminate that backlog. One way, though, the moral of this story is a good one, because what it did was put the focus on digitizing these records, which had been largely in paper all the way up till about, if you were a veteran, you left the service, in 2000, 2001, 2002. Anytime after that, you would have electronic record, but previous to that, you're going to have a paper-based record. So what the National Archives has been doing in partnership with the VA, the Veterans Administration, is digitizing those records as we're accessing them. So that if there is another incident like the pandemic or an incident where we're not able to be in person to service those records in the future, the most recent records will have been digitized and will be able to serve those records to veterans much more quickly and much more efficiently and effectively. And we do that because for people learning about genealogy, learning about military history, but also, really importantly, for veterans to be able to claim their benefits that are due to them from their service to this country. And it's really one of the most important things that we do. So we keep the paper records. We're not getting rid of them. As we're digitizing, we're not throwing them out. But we do know that providing access to our nation's records in digital format is the name of the game and is the direction we're going in the future, that we will have both. We will have paper analog records and we'll have digitized records that you will be able to access. So that if you're here in Houston and you want to have access to a record, you don't have to fly to Washington, D.C., you don't have to fly to St. Louis or one of our other archival facilities. As we start to make our way through our nation's records, we'll be able to provide them digitally to you. We view that as an important part of access.
If part of that access, if you're an underserved community, how do you get access to communities that may not understand what they have benefits perhaps from their military records, or how do you get underserved communities to understand the mission of the National Archives?
Right. It's a newer part of the National Archives way that we execute the mission. I would say in the last 5 to 10 years to be able to start to do that type of more targeted, strategic community outreach. We're lucky though, because we have 42 locations across the country. So I'm really trying to focus on that when I get out there into communities, doing events like this to be able to talk to people. I talk to the media all the time. I use the media as a way to be able to get that message out there. But we also have to rely upon our staff at our various archival facilities to be able to establish partnerships in communities. And we also view this as important to consult with communities, particularly underserved communities. Native American communities are extraordinarily important to us. African American communities, extremely important. We have a new project reaching out to Puerto Rican communities. And when we do that, we ask, okay, we have these records. This is what we have that you might be interested in. What would you think we should prioritize? So we're getting that feedback from the communities, because there's a lot we could work on. There's a lot we could that we could focus on as a priority, but asking those communities what would be of most interest and what would be most helpful and beneficial to you. One of our most important communities we're focused on is our Alaska Native population, because we had a facility in Anchorage, Alaska many years ago, which was closed down, and those records moved to Seattle. So we've been working very closely with Senator Murkowski to be able to digitize those Alaska Native records, which are now housed in Seattle, so that Alaska Native population doesn't have to travel. They can, but if they are unable to travel to Seattle, that they're able to have access to those records, which is incredibly important to those communities.
How do you choose which projects in a pecking order to do digitalization? And can the private sector play a role in helping with that?
Yes, the private sector does play a role. We have partnerships with companies such as Ancestry, which help us understand a lot of our people that use our records, not all, but a lot of the people that use our records, American citizens, are doing genealogy research. That's a very common and popular way to come to do research at the National Archives. And so we use partnerships with companies such as Ancestry to help us identify, because they know which records, because they're in the business, right, of providing that information to people that are interested in learning about their family history and their genealogy. So we use them as a way to help us figure out what records would be most responsive to the requests that they get at a place like Ancestry about what we can digitize. We also, our archivists that are working in all of our research rooms, they're our best resource because they're our connection to the public, and they know the records that are most frequently asked for, the groups of records that are most frequently asked for, and that can help us figure out which record groups we can prioritize for digitization.
As a presidential historian, and then I'm going to go to Amanda and Sarah, but I go to the presidential libraries,
yes,
like you're doing, and the old style Robert Caro, LBJ's biographer, used to say, no paper unturned, right? You bring out the cart,
right,
you have gloves on, you look at every paper you could possibly look at, but you're talking a lot about news and digitalization. How do we have a way to weed out misinformation from entering the National Archives?
Right, well, I mean, that's why we have the processes that we have in place, right? Because when records come into us, whether they would be we do have born digital records, obviously, coming into us, like emails and digital photographs that will never be in paper or analog format. But when records come into us, whether they are in digital format or they're paper or analog, or they're objects, because we have a lot of objects that come into us through the presidential library's gifts to presidents and gifts from the American people to presidents, we have a process for processing those records and understanding what we have that is available so that they can be authenticated, right, and becomes part of our national collection. So we, and it's a really good point, in an age in which there is misinformation and deep fakes, the National Archives will become more and more important, because what we serve up will be what is actually the nation's record, the actual documents, the actual evidence that details the decisions that were made. And so using us as an authoritative resource for those records, I think, is going to become, it's important now, it's going to become even more important 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and as we head into the future. And we will be, of course, challenged by that, but we are dedicated to figuring out ways in which we are able to serve up those records through our catalog, through an authenticated mechanism.
Amanda, what's the advantages of digitalization of documents versus tangible for scholars? I mean, we're often hearing, I get told of people, you must hear it, we're losing our history, it's all going to be on emails and digital. There's something about holding a document that's so much more. What's your take on all that?
Well, I mean, there's lots of different formats that information can exist in these days. So there's the physical and analog, and that is always satisfying. But, increasingly the digital formats are very, very important, and it's really, really valuable when you're able to search across a large body of text to tease out, threads of topics. You mentioned email, and it's possible now to preserve an entire email account using email preservation software, so that you can really do that in smart ways that make it easy for users to look across them. And it also makes it easy for donors of those email accounts to do some pre-processing of them and exclude things that they want to exclude, and look for personally identifying information that's inappropriate, such as credit card numbers or social security numbers. Very sophisticated techniques for accessing those kinds of digital formats.
Are we allowed what are the rules of engagement with emails? I mean, some people send them all day long feeling there's a privacy with them. Are those just by nature public records?
Well, it depends on your role. If you're a government entity, then yes. And you probably shouldn't have been using your government email to send personal emails. You know, I think all of us probably struggle a little bit with our email, our work lives and personal lives, kind of. So people do need to be careful about that. But say, for example, if you were, as a faculty member at Rice, if you were to donate your email account to the archives, you could say, I want to exclude the messages that are between myself and my family members, and say those email addresses, and those can be excluded, you know.
But what if I went forward and said, okay, here's my email, I'm donating it. Does the recipient and what they write you back, do you have a right because it came to you to have that be seen for the ages?
That is the nature of archives. I
Yeah.
mean, there just are, you know, there's photographs of people in archives that those people have no idea that their
That they're being made.
photograph is
Good point.
there. Correspondence is the same way. Old time, you know, physical, analog correspondence, same thing. Email, same thing. So it comes down to responsibility of the researchers and how they use those. And archivists need to guide conversations about appropriate use, but it comes down to the researcher's publication in the end.
Sarah, what's the most effective method to both, in your mind, to both preserve and establish access to information?
Well, I think both print and digital formats are very important to preserve. And I know it's very important. The mission of the university library is to preserve and make available the records of the university. So like Dr. Shogan was talking about how important it is to preserve the records of the country, we preserve the history of the university in our archives. And I see a lot of our archivists are here tonight. And an example of the work that they provided supported the Task Force on Slavery, Segregation, and Racial Injustice here. And we had two history faculty members co-chair that group, but the archives were a really key part of that whole process. We had students doing a lot of research in there, looking at primary source documents, really learning how to dive into really doing history, looking at records from the early university sales that William Marsh Rice made, trying to determine how he really did make his money. Was he a slave owner? How many slaves did he own? And they could look at all of that university history and the original documents to really dive into the history of the university. And it was so important that we had those records, and that we have records that we get questions all the time from the development office about the history of the university, the history of a family, that type of thing. So, you know, it's so important that we preserve things and that they also know how to weed things out. Some of the university records, like the history of the parking committee, may not be, you know, as scintillating, but when you're planning a campus master plan, you know, you may need to know where was that flood culvert, where was that that gully that runs on the west side of campus. So things that may seem to be kind of inconsequential may prove to be very important to keep. So I think the expertise of the archivist is really important in maintaining the history of the collection. What
are the archives at Rice that you're most proud of? The rare collections or an archival collection? Is it the Rice documents themselves, Rice history, or are there one collection you've personally grown fond of?
I love to look at the early images of the university and the maps of Houston. And I know we recently migrated our collections to from DSpace, which was an open source, more text-based software that MIT developed, to an image-based software that I think Nori worked really hard on that. But you can search the images much more easily now. And I love looking at the early images of Houston, aerial photographs of the Rice Village, historic homes in Houston. And I think that's really very fun to see. And then we have lots of those images hanging in different conference rooms around campus. And I particularly enjoy looking at those images.
Dr. Shogan, is it possible to, let's say something as large as climate change. Is there something at the National Archives that one of the modern climate scientists can go back to an archive and see over a period of time, like ship logs or
Yes.
weather records or things.
Right.
And are people asking the archives for those?
Yes, they are. In fact, I saw that. I think I'm trying to think of so many trips. I believe it was in Seattle that we saw some ship logs. There were water temperature records and other information that turned out to be extraordinarily valuable to scientists that were looking back for early measurements. So that's kind of the interesting thing about archives, and that's a good example about the parking committee, because you don't know why that might be valuable later on, and it might not be, for something that you think is going to be particularly important, but then it turns out that they did collect some information or data on something that for another reason it turns out to be incredibly relevant.
I'd like to ask just each of you, and we're going to open it up for questions pretty soon, but I'd like, Amanda, America's going to be hitting 250 years old, and we're a country with all sorts of different problems and also incredible successes. What ways do you see Rice and the archives here be thinking about America at 250 in a way that we can teach young people about the history of our country?
Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity in archives to teach young people about history, because you can use archival like primary sources it's really exciting to get in the classroom with kids, especially high school, but also even younger kids, and have them do an analysis exercise with archival materials to really get a feel for what that kind of critical thinking is with archives. And I think we've seen time and time again that we have to keep looking to understand our history. And so as there are more and more archives preserved, there are more and more things that we can look at to understand ourselves better. We've had that experience here in Texas, trying to understand the history of convict leasing better. So we've just recently, in the past 5 years, gone through a time where convict leasing really wasn't even hardly mentioned in Texas history books, textbooks for students. And now, as we have more materials in the archives, we have more community activists engaging with archives. We have authoritative sources that we can use to put in the textbooks and to use for learning modules with students.
And what, not to belabor it, but convict leasing in a nutshell, what is that?
Well, it is a practice that happened after the end of the Civil War, where companies such as sugar companies in our area would contract with prisons in order to get laborers to come and work on the sugar farm. So they were convicts and they were leased out for their labor. And so archives can really help tell those stories in specific ways. If you see a contract for convict leasing and you see that they have limited their preference for the laborers to be, as they would say in the contract, Negroes, so they're looking for African Americans in particular to be doing that work. Those individual documents are so powerful to really tell the story of what was going on.
And do we, at Rice University, Sarah, does Rice partner with the University of Houston or with the University of Texas or with Houston Public Library? What's the partnership of the world of Rice with archives, including the National Archive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a very close collaboration with our local archives community. We have a statewide network through the Texas Digital Library that we contribute our content to the Digital Public Library of America. And I hope many of you are familiar with that, but it's an open source linked public library that has books, but it has all kinds of archival records. And I know Amanda and her staff have been working hard recently on uploading oral histories from our Asian archive that the Chow Foundation and the Chow Center have been funding. So we work closely with the University of Houston. I know we have both networking opportunities, so our archivists know each other socially, but we share information about what's in our archives so that researchers can be referred effectively back and forth. I know that the University of Houston has a very strong LGBTQ collection, and we have a really strong collection of kind of oral histories of when the AIDS crisis was really hitting Houston in the 80s.
Really?
And yeah, we had a big event a few years ago announcing those archives, and we had a very nice event with that. So we do collaborate, and we try to work so that researchers can have a seamless way of finding information over different archives.
With the National Archives will be a focal point
Yes.
of 2026. First off, on a personal scale of your journey from Pittsburgh to Boston College, White House, historical, and now having this remarkable job, are you ever just in awe of, like, you're alone at night in the National Archives and there's the Declaration of Independence and you're the the overseer, you're the
Yeah,
keeper
right.
of the keys to the kingdom?
Yeah.
Or am I romanticizing your job?
No, you're not. You're actually not. You're not romanticizing it at all. I tend to be a morning person, not a night person. So what I like to do, I try every day that I work in that building in Washington, D.C., which is, I travel around quite a bit, but every day that I work in D.C., where we do keep the Declaration, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, we keep that in, if you've not visited us, in this beautiful rotunda right off the National Mall, where you can come in and view the documents. And I like to go and visit them 2 times in the morning. Before they actually rise up around 8 a.m. because sometimes we have military ceremonies there before we open at 10 o'clock, and every once in a while we have some educational groups that will come in and other special guests. But most of the time it's pretty quiet there before 10 a.m. So if I can, and I get in around 8 or 8:15 and I don't have a meeting until maybe 9, and I can just stash my bag, I can really walk. It takes me 2 minutes, and I can walk right around the corner and spend a few minutes with the documents, say hi to our security guards who are there. Obviously, anytime the documents are out, they're there, and talk to them. The other time I like to go visit is around lunchtime, which tends to be a pretty heavily visited time frame, and just take a quick lap around, because then at that point it's full. There's a lot of people. We have a lot of visitors, but I don't so much like to look at the documents at that point in time. I like watching the people. Many people, a lot of them kids, who have studied this, and this is a big deal for them because they're on a school field trip. So it's really exciting to see the school field trips with teachers and principals and everybody that's come along. But it just seeing our tourists and our visitors that come, because it's really amazing. I get to see those documents any day that I'm there. Many people that come and visit us, this will be the only time that they will see these physical documents in front of them in their lifetime. And it's just fun to watch people and have that special moment. So I do this all the time. And for America 250, I view us as we are the place to be for the 250th anniversary of the United States, because it's the 250th anniversary of the most important document probably in the history of the world, which is the Declaration of Independence. And so we anticipate that everybody's going to want to come and see the Declaration, learn about the Declaration, celebrate the Declaration, and also think about a careful evaluation. How far have we come for those principles and that are promised in the Declaration? And how far do we have to go in the future to actually fulfill them? So that's going to be the theme of how we're going to center our celebration and commemoration at the National Archives, and I'm really looking forward to it.
There's this polarization going on in America, and we have traditional American history. 1619 project came in. Many people are wondering, what is how do we round out American history narrative, and how as a country can we have an uplift like we did for the bicentennial? Is it, maybe in your answers you had, or all of you, we really are opening up archival thinking oral histories and going to Alaska but is there a, how do we form a national narrative, or is that not the job of an archive? It's simply to present documentation of the past, to do it professionally, or is there a larger obligation to say, we're obviously proud of the Declaration of Independence and democracy. How do we use something like 250 to reinforce our democratic values? What do you think, Amanda?
Well, I think we need to, as archivists, we are the keepers of the records, but also the builders of the collections, so well ahead of the 250, we need to be building collections, talking up collections, and inspiring researchers and artists and all kinds of people to be coming in to interpret them and use them, and they're the ones who would be creating the works, the new histories, the new films, the new creative writing, or new works of art, whatever's been inspired by the archives. So I do think partly our role is just to present it and support the research work that others do, but it is also, very interactive in the sense that we have to be out in the community and talking to people and trying to build, more inclusive collections that include more voices and such.
Yeah, and in that spirit, Sarah, it does seem that in the talk today, it's very heartening of the types of new collections. People are looking at, AIDS in the 80s in Houston,
right.
or looking at a marginalized community, or looking at a catastrophe of environmental justice, or looking at slavery in different and new ways. So is the main view of the archivist, in your feeling, is to make sure that we're constantly opening up the narrative, in the way that when Obama was president, he added in the National Park Service Buffalo Soldiers and Cesar Chavez and Stonewall, and to open up that. Do you see the archivist isn't to editorialize, but simply to build collections and find people to know about it?
Yeah, I would agree with Amanda. It's the job of the archivist in the library to build the collections. And to that end, we recently hired a new university historian, and her name is Portia Hopkins, and she's committed to building a more inclusive, diverse history and looking at student groups, getting the history of what students are doing, looking at what people are doing with social media. We haven't done a lot collecting, the history of how the university communicates with Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, who's preserving those records, looking at how we can include more voices in our archives. I know during Hurricane Harvey you mentioned climate things, and we started developing the Houston Jewish Archive in helping some of the synagogues were flooded, and we had Melissa Kane, who was the university historian then, and Josh Furman, and some of our archivists, Amanda and the staff here, really worked with those synagogues on preserving their documents. And since then we've really grown this Houston Jewish Archive that is now Sanford, Alexander, South Texas Jewish Archive. So they recently had a conference here, and I think it's important that our role continue to expand, as Amanda said, and collect more diverse collections that then people can create their own works with and do exhibits both online and in person. We have a wonderful folk music archive that we've been developing with all kinds of music and album covers, and Nori, I looked at Nori and thought of the folk music archive. So that's a really interesting collection that's focused on Houston artists, I believe in the 60s and 70s, but researchers may find a wealth of information there and do something really interesting with, the anniversary of the country with music or something. So it's really important, like you said, to collect things. You may not know what really resonates with somebody at the time.
Very, Dr. Shogan, your job's a heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
The National Archives has gotten a lot. It's in the press all the time. We're hearing about problems, not problems at the National Archives, but we're dealing with former president and having to grapple with archival issues.
Mm-hmm.
How do you so effectively travel 40-some cities and states, but you've been able to kind of stay on message when you might have a media culture trying to pull out? And what are the pitfalls of your job in the sense of not being politicized because you're working for all the American people,
That's right.
not just a particular president?
Thank you for the question. It's really important to me. We at the National Archives, we are a nonpartisan institution. So I am, I was nominated by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate. But the archivist, like the Librarian of Congress, serves throughout administrations, not just for one particular presidential administration. I bring to this job a very long career in nonpartisan service. I worked at the Congressional Research Service for many years, which is at the Library of Congress, which provides research and analysis to all members of Congress from both political parties, majority and minority. I worked at the Library of Congress for many years in the senior executive contingent there, running the library itself. And at the White House Historical Association, both when President Trump was president and then into President Biden's tenure. So for me, this is incredibly important that I do the job for all Americans. I do not, do the job for all Democrats or for all Republicans. No, everybody is welcome to the National Archives and should be using the National Archives because it is our shared history as Americans, not just as one part of a political party or ideology. So it's incredibly important to me. I mean, yes, I travel around the country a lot. I do a lot of different media interviews, talk to a lot of different people. I stay on message. I'm disciplined because I stay on message, and I've worked with a lot of politicians and watched them over the years, so I understand the importance of staying on message and what that means to be successful. But it's easy for me to stay on message because that's what I actually believe. I'm not making it up. Like, I actually think this is important, and this is how I do the job every day and how I approach it. So it's not difficult for me because I don't have a temptation to go this way or to go that way because I actually believe that this is what we need to do at the National Archives, and I hope that 2026 is a moment of unifying clarity for this country, and I will do everything in my power to be able to try to make that happen. I'm only one person, and I'm only the head of one agency of 2,600 people, so there are limits to what I can achieve and what I can do, but we can continue to be able to foster that message from our National Archives locations, our presidential libraries, and when I travel on the road, to be able to expound that message. Because yes, there are things that we disagree on. We should still have those debates. I'm not in favor of squelching debate in a democracy. But I think if we would talk together, we would actually end up saying that there's more that we actually would agree on in principle than what divides us. And maybe just for a moment, we could focus on what we agree upon rather than the things in which we disagree. And I have high hopes for it. We'll see what happens. But that's certainly what I'm going to be doing.
I've been doing this a long time, and that's such a beautiful close. I'm not going to step on it. That was perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are going to take some questions, though. And did anybody write on cards? There they are, right by me. They snuck them in on me. I have some here, so let me. Did you write one?
No.
Well,
I didn't pass them around.
Oh.
roll for it. Go for it.
Yeah, go.
Okay, so, Shogan, on January 6th, what did the staff at the National Archives do when the insurrection was happening just across the street to protect your collections?
Right. So I wasn't there because I was confirmed in May of this year. So I was not at the National Archives on that day. I was working from home. I was at White House Historical Association at the time. As I understand, I can't give you any specifics on that, except that I know that on that day we have regular communication as any other day with security, federal security forces in Washington, D.C., or local police that keep us informed about any threats that we may have to the building or to our facilities. And we are very well in Washington, D.C. and in our other locations, but in particular the building I work at, we are very highly fortified with steel iron doors that can be shut, and not a literal moat, but what is called a moat that is around the building. And doors that can be shut. It would be very hard. It was one of the first things I did, though. It's an important question. When I became the archivist, was to take a perimeter tour with our security team and have them explain to me if there was a situation, any situation in which I felt that the building and the documents and everything that we hold and trust would be threatened, what would happen in very short order. And that was within my first week of serving as archivist. They explained to me what would happen in that situation, and I feel very confident that our nation's treasures and our records and our documents and our people that work with us would indeed be safe.
Thank you. I won't forget you. Let me hit some of these that are on the cards, though. The National Archives, maintain records for CIA, FBI, and DEA?
Yes, we do.
Mm-hmm. And are you having to sometime? What's a classification process? Is that just we don't have time for it? It's a Byzantine and
it's
difficult.
the D class is what we're concerned with. Yeah. We have the National Declassification Center at the National Archives that was stood up by President Obama in an executive order after he became president. And we have about 65 people working in the National Declassification Center at the National Archives, which is in our College Park location. And their job is that we do not declassify information at the National Archives per standing executive orders, but we do have teams of individuals that gather together our classifying agencies, our intelligence agencies, with teams, some of them which are embedded at the National Archives, with the notion of trying to declassify information as rapidly as possible. But I just want to be honest with you. If you said, I don't even know how to say it to the scale of, if this is how much money is being used to classify information in this country on a daily basis, a lot for good reason, right? This would be how much, is going to declassify information. So it's not, it's on a huge magnitude of scale. And I've talked to many members of Congress and senators who are interested in this. And there's many ways that we can approach that, but that would have to come through policy changes that would enable, either giving the National Archives declassification authority or policy decisions that would fund the National Declassification Center or other entities to keep pace with the classification process, because it's not even comparable.
Thank you. Very good. Here is. I thought we'd get one of these, but to what extent are the records related to the Kennedy assassination still under wraps?
So, as I understand it, all of the records, all the records are available in some way, shape, or form, but there are redactions on a good number of the records. So the records are available, but there are redactions. Once again, that's a related question to the previous question, because the agencies that have classified that information are contending that there are still national security risks, and they are unable to declassify some of those redactions that have existed. And some of that has to do, per their justifications, to human intelligence sources. Other things could be personally identifiable information, PII, which we're very sensitive, all archivists are very sensitive to. So I know there is a push to try to make as much of that information available as possible. But would not be a decision that I could make at the National Archives. It really comes from the classifying authorities.
You know, when I once wrote a biography of Gerald Ford, and I got to spend time with President Ford out in Rancho Mirage, California. And after I was interviewing him for my book a couple days, but we got along very well. And one day after his club, everybody did with him. But one day after a club, going to his club, and he brought me into a study, and he said, "I want to show you something," because I was asking about his time as president, NATO, and Helsinki Accords and Mayaguez. And he said, "Oh, you see the stack here?" And there's this big stack, like on the lower part of his thing. Yep, and he said, "See the stack over there?" And it was very slender. He said, "This is the people that wrote me about the Warren Commission report in the last week."
Oh, wow.
This is who's asked me something about my presidency.
Yeah, right. His service on the Warren Commission.
Yeah,
yes,
so
right.
so it'll never end. You're going to get the Kennedy question forever. Trust me on it.
Right. Is there a follow-up, or is?
Well,
okay.
This connected. Maybe we can connect Well, I think some people want to really get clear on the presidential libraries. They're part of the National Archives. FDR started all of that.
That's correct.
Creating them, and since FDR, all presidents are part of the National Archives, and including that we went back, to be fair, since FDR was Democrat, Herbert Hoover's part of it. But some recent libraries, like the Obama one, is not doing it the same way as the other presidential libraries. So explain, what are those presidential libraries, how they work to the archives, and how is the Obama model different?
Right, that's correct. So we have 15 presidential libraries in our system today. 13 of them would be considered to be sort of the traditional model. And President Obama is building a presidential center on the south side of Chicago, which I've been able to tour. Very impressive campus. And he is building a museum, and there's going to be a public library, and there's going to be community space and a lot of educational space for kids. The papers, President Obama, though, wanted to build, and once again, this predates me, so I'm just telling you how I've been briefed. President Obama wanted to build the first digital presidential library. So to be fair, 90% of his records are born digital records. Only 10% are born paper records. So 90% are like emails or memos that were created digitally, or photographs, like all of Pete Souza's photographs are all digital records, right? All those pictures he took of President Obama. So 90% are born digital and 10% were analog. So what he decided to do was to help fund the National Archives. His foundation would help fund the National Archives to digitize the remaining 10% that was analog, so that then there would be 100% a digital presidential library of his administration. So the foundation has been doing that, and we have a facility right outside of Chicago in a suburb where we have all of those analog records. We're currently digitizing them right now. They will be done in the next couple of years. All of the presidential gifts will be photographed and will be available online. So we will be building a digital archival research room. It's already up and running, but there's just very limited number of records that are on it right now. But eventually we will have the full complement of President Obama's records that will be available online. We are also going to have a small presence in that Southside facility because that's why I went to go talk to the foundation. They're building this terrific complex. Wouldn't it be great if we had a portion, a small portion, which would enable some of our archivists that would be employed by the Obama Presidential Library that could be on site. So if people are trying to use that online digital archival resource, but they're having trouble finding the emails, they're not understanding how to search, or you still need the assistance of an archivist, even if you're doing those searches online or digitally rather than coming into an actual in-person research room. And so the foundation has been very receptive to that. So we are moving forward to an agreement where we will have people on site there that will be able to answer questions from researchers and also from the general public who are just curious and they want to learn more about how they can search for President Obama's records. So that is a slightly different model than if you went to, like I will tomorrow, to President George H.W. Bush's presidential library in College Station, which is a NARA facility through and through. It's on the A&M campus, but the museum is owned and operated by the National Archives. Of course, the archive itself is operated by the National Archives. The educational programs operated by NARA. That's the traditional model, and President Obama has opted for this other model. So we'll have to see what happens in the future. It's really hard to say.
I'm going to summarize a lot of interesting points, but bottom line at this point, private content distribution networks like cloud are not 100% reliable. How will National Archives know with all this digitalization, how do you achieve reliability?
Right, by redundancy. That's how we do it with the cloud. So we have, I believe it's every digital copy of a record is stored in 4 times, is stored in 4 different cloud locations. And we're not all in with one company. So, or one private entity. So AWS is the big player there, but we have other companies as well. So if there would be something that would happen where one would go down, or there would, I don't know, there would be a hack or issues, we would have built-in redundancy, and that's how we work with that.
There seems to be a few of this concern about our digital age. But so one part of this one is how are we positive our archives isn't biased towards state-owned enterprises, governments, or corporations that don't necessarily share the values of the country at large?
How are we?
I guess that they're thinking about worrying that the history that what's being it continues. How can we make sure, how we even know that these algorithms that are being developed are consistent with the values of openness, inquiry, and freedom?
Oh, well, I mean, that's a good question. We're grappling with this right now. I was reading in the plane to Houston, because President Biden has just issued a new executive order on artificial intelligence. I glanced at the executive order, but I was really reading the 25-page Office of Management and Budget draft memo that accompanied the executive order, which is how all agencies are going to implement use of AI and artificial intelligence. So, there's encouragement from President Biden, from the government, to use artificial intelligence, and we're going to have to use it at the National Archives. There is literally no way. We have 13.5 billion records, that are analog, and we have 33 billion and growing of born digital. So there is no way you can navigate that large amount of information and material without using assistance from machine learning and artificial intelligence. We're going to have to use those technologies, but they're going to, the government is starting to put, I think, astutely, and we're going to have to work our way through this, I say like guardrails or guidelines for how we're going to be using these tools going forward. We've had some really good successes of artificial intelligence. I'll use one brief example. The 1950 census was released, I would say, about a year ago. And the National Archives used artificial intelligence, machine learning, to be able to do search, to enable searchability on the 1950 census, which of course was all handwritten. So people went around to your house and who lives here, right? Okay. And if you wanted to search, for example, I did this, so I searched for my parents' names. My dad's name, Richard Shogan, was pretty easy to find. I knew where he grew up. He grew up in Pittsburgh itself. I found him in about 10 minutes. My mom's name was Patricia Smith. She grew up in Irwin. Okay, that's pretty common. But it took me about 15 minutes to find her, but I found her. And that's through the miracles of machine learning to enable that type of search. So those are the ways in which we are going to be using artificial intelligence. You guys might have other ways that you're going to be using it, but to be able to sift through these large quantities of information, you're looking for a needle in the haystack. How can we use AI to help you with patterns that will able to find the needle that you're looking for?
Sarah, anything about AI for at Rice University at this juncture?
Well, we actually have a task force working on that in the library with 3 different things that they're looking at. You know, how we can use AI to help support researchers on campus, teaching and learning, and then our own work in the library. And I'm eagerly awaiting to hear that it's a really great group of people working at this. I think, you know, with metadata and describing collections, I think there's a lot of future for artificial intelligence there. But I have to say, I'm not the expert on this, and I'm excited to hear suggestions about ways this is going to affect what we do.
Let's go an old-fashioned route with this question, which I like. How do we know what, Amanda, ephemera to collect? How do we?
Oh gosh, ephemera is my favorite.
Yeah, I'm fond of it too.
Yes, love ephemera. There's so many different kinds of ephemera. You know, the one that comes to mind is event programs. Can be really rich. You know, we have some. Well, here's an example: the Filipino American community in Houston has like annual events that are big cultural events for the community, and they have programs for the event. And so their Houston chapter of their National Historical Society will have a president who gives a message at the beginning of it. And then it tells all the different kinds of activities that they're going to have and where and who's involved. There's ads placed by members of the community. And it just becomes this really rich source of information. You know, like if you think about all the data points that are available in just that one document, you could, you know, look at those as little slices of life that you could build up over time and do some data visualization with those to show what was going on in that community, in our city, who was involved, you know, what were the specific addresses in town where things were happening, you know. So you might think an event program, what good is this? But it's really, you know, it's that kind of slice of life that put together, a snapshot, you know, put together with other things helps you really paint a picture, you know. So we see like business brochures, event programs, dance cards and scrapbooks. I mean, ephemera can take all different kinds of shapes and formats, you know.
Where does it differ from material culture like bobblehead baseball dolls or quilts, or where does the archival world begin to pop folk manifestations like menus of Houston from restaurants from the 1950s? Is all fair game, or are those just decisions various archivists make when they're building their collection?
Yeah, they are decisions like that based at a collection, but you know, there's a lot of value in those things. You can use them in lots of different ways. We have a t-shirt collection from one of the clubs on campus here, and you would think, oh, you know, that does not sound very interesting, but it's actually very interesting because it is the t-shirt collection of the LGBTQ club on campus, which starts out with the Rice colors are blue and gray, and so it's a blue shirt with an emblem on it that is the Rice seal, and in one little corner of the seal there's a tiny little owl coming out of the closet. You would have to be, you know, this close and really looking to see it and know what it was and read what was on the seal. Like from a distance, it just looks like, oh, there's a shirt with the Rice seal. And then as you go forward in time, you can see the development of the t-shirts being like much more out and proud. And so that's a material culture telling a story. And you can parallel that story with pictures in the yearbook. You know, so sometimes we talk to classes about that, or we have tables at like the Pride Parade and show things like that. they really can help paint the picture.
And how did you, Amanda, become an archivist?
Well, I was a student worker as an undergrad in the library, and I loved my job, and I thought, you know what? I think I always want to work in the library and I want to support research, but it took me going to library school right after undergrad and taking some different required classes to find my home in archives, because by nature I like to make order out of chaos, but I'm okay with some chaos. And that is a requirement for archivists. You have to be able to tolerate both order and chaos, you know. So I really have never done anything else besides work in archives.
It's your trade, and you love it.
Yeah, I do.
What about yourself? How did you get involved with caring about preservation of documents, and particularly of Rice University's heritage?
Well, kind of the same as Amanda. I was a student worker. I went to Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, and worked in the science library. I was a biology major, and I was a pre-med and Russian studies major, and did not get into medical school, and went to the Career Center and took an aptitude test, and they said, well, you like working in the library, and why don't you keep doing that? So I thought, well, that's pretty great advice, and I did that, and moved to Houston and have been working at Rice, and I'm just interested in many aspects of working in libraries. I was a science librarian at first and got really interested in scholarly communication and, you know, how scientists communicate with their research, and managing data and the role of the library. So I think it's always been just a great place to work. And I love, like Amanda, supporting research and learning about what other people are doing, but I'm not really that interested in doing my own deep research. You know, like I enjoyed reading your book about the National Park Service and history of Yellowstone and all of that, but you know, I enjoyed reading that, but I wouldn't want to actually go and do all the work that you did.
Well, speaking for my deans here in Humanities, speaking to all of us, we can't do books without archivists. We can't do anything without all of you. And my takeaway from tonight is how lucky we are, Amanda and Sarah, to have you at Rice University and your dedication to higher education and to the archival world. And our country's got a hot shot here with Dr. Shogan. She's tremendously brilliant, committed. It's fantastic to be able to be here with you, and congratulations on a very well-earned billet. And we'll all be turning to you as America turns 250.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Really good. Great.